My father had been dead for 21 days when my family decided it was time to have dinner together. Not to mourn him, not to remember him, but to divide what he left behind. The house in Beverly Hills was exactly the way he had always kept it. Polished floors, expensive paintings, the kind of quiet luxury that tells you a man spent decades building something powerful. From the outside, it probably looked like a grieving family gathering. Inside that dining room, however, everyone was thinking about the same thing. My father's fortune, 40 years of business, hundreds of millions in assets, hotels, office buildings, land across California, and one simple question: who would control it now? I could see the answer written on their faces the moment I walked in. My uncle avoided eye contact. My cousin kept whispering to him. And my stepmother, Victoria, the woman who married my father only 4 years before he died, was smiling like someone who had already read the last page of the story. Then the lawyer arrived. 10 minutes later, the will was opened. And according to that document, I didn't exist. My own family had just erased me from my father's inheritance. What they didn't know was that my father had spent his entire life planning for moments exactly like this. And before he died, he left behind something they never saw coming. Something that would change that dinner and their lives forever. The lawyer didn't rush. Men like him never do. He placed the black folder carefully on the table, adjusted his glasses, and looked around the room as if measuring the weight of every person sitting there. My Uncle Richard leaned back in his chair with the relaxed posture of someone who believed the night was already going in his favor. Daniel, his son, kept swirling the wine in his glass, barely hiding a smile. And Victoria, my stepmother, sat in my father's chair at the head of the table. Perfect posture, calm, patient, like someone waiting for a train she already knew was arriving. I watched all of them quietly, because my father had taught me something important a long time ago. When people think they've already won, they stop hiding who they really are. The lawyer opened the folder. This document, he began, contains the final will and testament of Michael Carter. No one spoke. Outside the massive windows, Los Angeles stretched into the night. Endless lights, distant traffic, the quiet pulse of a city that never truly sleeps. Inside the room, the air felt heavier with every second. The lawyer began reading. Properties, companies, investment funds, charitable donations. Victoria's smile grew slightly wider with each paragraph. My uncle's shoulders relaxed. Daniel leaned forward in anticipation. Then something strange happened. The lawyer closed the document. That concludes the distribution of the estate, he said. I frowned slightly, not because of what he said, because of what he didn't say. My name. It had never appeared. Not once. Not in the properties. Not in the companies. Not anywhere. For a moment the room was silent. Then my uncle cleared his throat. Well, he said, almost casually, I suppose your father made his decisions very clear. Daniel chuckled quietly. Victoria slowly lifted her glass of wine. No one even bothered to look at me. In their minds, the story was already finished. I had just been cut out of hundreds of millions of dollars. But what they didn't understand was this. My father had spent 40 years building an empire in a world where trust was the most dangerous mistake a man could make. Which meant one thing. If he had truly wanted to leave me with nothing, he would have made sure I wasn't in that room at all. And that was the moment I realized something that made me lean back in my chair and smile. The will they had just heard was never meant to be the real one. My uncle was the first one to speak. Well, Richard said, leaning forward with his hands folded on the table, I suppose your father believed you were better off building your own life. The tone was calm, almost sympathetic, but his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't sympathizing. He was celebrating. Daniel didn't even bother hiding it. He leaned back in his chair and laughed quietly, taking another sip of wine like he was already spending money that wasn't his yet. Victoria, however, stayed perfectly composed. She slowly set her glass down and looked directly at me for the first time that night. And in that moment I understood something. She wasn't surprised, which meant she had known about the will, or at least she believed she did. Are you all right? She asked. Her voice was soft, concerned, almost warm. Anyone who didn't know her would have believed it. But I had spent 4 years watching that woman carefully. Victoria never asked a question unless she already knew the answer. I'm fine, I said, and that was the moment the lawyer cleared his throat. There is, he said slowly, one more document. Every head in the room turned toward him. My uncle frowned. What document? The lawyer reached back into his briefcase and removed a second folder. This one wasn't black. It was gray and sealed. My instructions were very specific, he continued. This document was only to be opened if Mr. Carter's son was present at the reading. The room went quiet again. I didn't move. I already knew my father well enough to understand something important. He loved strategy, loved patience, loved watching people reveal themselves before the real game even began. The lawyer broke the seal and began to read. This document, he said, contains the instructions for the Carter Family Trust. I saw Victoria's smile disappear. My uncle leaned forward again. Trust? He asked. The lawyer continued reading. While the previously read will distributes certain visible assets. He paused. The majority of Michael Carter's estate is not governed by the will. Another pause, but by the trust. I watched their faces carefully. Confusion, then worry, then something else. Fear. Because in estate law, a trust changes everything. And when the lawyer turned the page and read the next line, the room finally understood why my father had never worried about betrayal. The sole controlling trustee, the lawyer said calmly, is Michael Carter's son. And for the first time that night, everyone at that table looked directly at me. For a moment, no one spoke. Not my uncle, not Daniel, not even Victoria. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint traffic far below the hills of Beverly Hills. My uncle was the first to recover. That doesn't make sense, Richard said, his voice suddenly sharper. The will clearly states. The will, the lawyer interrupted calmly, controls only the assets outside the Carter Family Trust. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at my uncle. Most of Mr. Carter's holdings were moved into that trust years ago. Years ago, I felt something strange hearing that, because my father had never mentioned it, which meant he had planned this long before anyone in that room had begun planning against me. How much? Daniel asked. The lawyer looked down at the document, then back up. Approximately 87% of the estate. The air left the room. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around her glass. My uncle's face turned pale, because 87% wasn't just the majority. It was everything that mattered. Hotels, corporate shares, real estate holdings, control. And the trustee? Richard asked slowly. The lawyer didn't hesitate. Michael Carter's son. The entire table turned toward me. For the first time that night, I had their full attention. I didn't smile. My father hated when people celebrated too early. Instead, I leaned forward slightly. So, I said calmly, what exactly does the trust say? The lawyer turned the page. The trustee, he read, has full authority over all assets within the Carter Family Trust. He paused briefly, including the authority to remove, replace, or restrict distributions to any beneficiaries. That word changed the entire room. Beneficiaries, which meant something very important. They weren't owners. They were dependents. My uncle spoke again, but now his voice was careful. You're saying he controls everything? Yes. And the rest of us? The lawyer looked at the document again. You receive distributions at the discretion of the trustee. Silence returned. Daniel set his glass down slowly. Victoria didn't move at all. She simply stared at me, trying to calculate something, trying to understand what she had missed. And that was when the lawyer said something that changed everything again. There is also a letter, he said. A personal instruction from Mr. Carter. My heart slowed. My father hadn't just planned the finances. He had planned the message. The lawyer unfolded a single sheet of paper and began to read. My son, the letter began. If you are hearing this, it means something happened exactly the way I expected. The lawyer paused for a moment before continuing. Money reveals people. Power reveals them even faster. I looked around the table. My uncle, my cousin, Victoria. Every face in that room had already revealed more than they intended. You will notice, the lawyer continued reading, that I left you nothing in the will. That was intentional. A faint shift moved through the room. Because the will was never meant for you. It was meant for them. The lawyer looked up briefly, then continued. A test is only useful if people believe it is real. I almost laughed. That was exactly the kind of thing my father would do. Build a stage, let everyone walk onto it, and then watch. By the time this letter is read, the lawyer continued, you will know exactly who you can trust. The room felt colder now. And remember this. The Carter Empire was never meant to be divided. It was meant to be controlled. The lawyer lowered the letter. That concludes Mr. Carter's instructions. No one moved. No one spoke. Because everyone in that room understood the same thing at the same time. For weeks they had believed they were preparing to divide an empire. In reality, they had been sitting inside my father's trap. Victoria finally broke the silence. "How long did you know?" she asked. I looked at her. "About 5 minutes." That answer confused her, which was exactly the point. Because the truth was something else entirely. My father hadn't just protected the money. He had protected something far more dangerous. Control. And now the entire room understood something they hadn't realized when the night began. The inheritance wasn't the fortune. The inheritance was power. And for the first time since my father died, I was the one holding it. The room stayed silent for a long moment. My uncle looked like a man trying to wake up from a bad dream. Daniel stared at the table. Victoria, however, kept watching me carefully. She was the only one still thinking. That was when the lawyer spoke again. "There is one final instruction." Every head turned toward him. My uncle let out a nervous laugh. "There's more?" "Yes," the lawyer said calmly. He opened the folder again and pulled out another document. "This instruction concerns the continuation of the Carter family trust." Victoria leaned forward slightly. "What does that mean?" The lawyer read the lines slowly. "In the event that my son accepts control of the trust." He paused. "He must also accept responsibility for the future of the Carter family." No one understood what that meant yet, until the lawyer turned the page. "And the secondary beneficiary of the trust." The room went still again. Victoria frowned. "What secondary beneficiary?" The lawyer looked directly at me. Then he read the final line. "My granddaughter." The word hit the room like a stone dropping into water. "My granddaughter." My uncle immediately spoke. "That's impossible. You don't have children." Daniel looked just as confused. But Victoria didn't say anything. She simply stared at me. And then slowly, she turned her head toward the doorway behind the dining room. At the same moment, the front door of the house opened. Soft footsteps echoed through the hallway. Everyone in the room turned. A small figure appeared in the doorway. Dark hair, white dress, clear eyes. The same eyes that had looked at me across the restaurant weeks earlier. The same eyes that had whispered the message that started everything. The little girl walked into the room calmly. She stopped beside the lawyer. Then she looked at me, not with fear, not with curiosity, but with recognition. And that was the moment something my father had written in the letter finally made sense. The Carter Empire was never meant to be divided, because it was never meant to belong to just one generation. The lawyer closed the folder. "The trust," he said quietly, "will remain under the control of Michael Carter's son." He looked at the girl. "Until the day his daughter is old enough to take it from him." The entire room turned toward me, waiting for an explanation. But the truth was something none of them were ready to hear. Because that little girl had been part of my father's plan for years. And if they believed the inheritance battle was over tonight, they had no idea how much bigger the game really was.